which are the sounds of the hull itself under great stress, that's alarming. You just never know when it's going to fail.
For more than a century, we all learned one version of the Titanic story, but it was incomplete. A revolutionary 2026 scan revealed truths that stunned experts worldwide. The iceberg damage wasn't what historians claimed. The damage pattern was completely different. Everything we thought we knew was wrong. Why were we misled for so long? What else remains hidden down there? Join us as we explore the groundbreaking scan that finally exposed the truth and changed Titanic history forever. Historical context: the unsinkable ship. The RMS Titanic represented the pinnacle of early 20th century maritime engineering and industrial ambition. Constructed at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, the vessel measured approximately 882 feet in length and weighed over 46,000 tons. The ship was designed as the second of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners commissioned by the White Star Line, intended to dominate the transatlantic passenger trade through a combination of unprecedented size, luxury, and technological sophistication. The engineering specifications of the Titanic incorporated advanced safety features that were considered revolutionary for the era. The hull was divided into 16 watertight compartments, separated by bulkheads that could be sealed electronically from the bridge. This compartmentalization was calculated to allow the ship to remain afloat even if 4 of these compartments were compromised. Naval architects and maritime experts of the period assessed this design as virtually impervious to sinking, leading to widespread characterization of the vessel as unsinkable in promotional materials and press coverage. Beyond safety considerations, the Titanic served as a floating showcase of Edwardian luxury and craftsmanship. First-class accommodations featured a swimming pool, Turkish baths, a gymnasium, and a grand staircase crowned with an ornate glass dome. The ship's interior spaces incorporated materials sourced from around the world, including carved oak paneling, elaborate wrought ironwork, and custom-designed furniture. The vessel was designed not merely as transportation, but as a statement of human achievement and industrial progress. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic departed Southampton, England on her maiden voyage to New York City, carrying approximately 2,200 passengers and crew. The manifest included some of the wealthiest individuals in the world traveling in first class, middle-class families seeking opportunities in America in second class, and hundreds of immigrants in third-class accommodations hoping to begin new lives. At approximately 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, the ship's lookout spotted an iceberg directly ahead. Despite immediate evasive action, the Titanic struck the ice mass on her starboard side at approximately 11:40 p.m. ship's time. The collision occurred in the North Atlantic Ocean, approximately 400 nautical miles south of Newfoundland, in waters known for iceberg presence during spring months. The initial impact appeared relatively minor to most passengers and crew. Many reported feeling only a slight grinding sensation or hearing an unusual scraping sound. The ship's engines stopped, but there was no immediate indication of catastrophic damage. However, below the waterline, seawater was rapidly entering multiple compartments in the forward sections of the vessel. By midnight, it became clear to the ship's officers and designer Thomas Andrews, who was aboard for the maiden voyage, that the damage was fatal. The flooding of 6 forward compartments exceeded the ship's designed survival capacity. Water entering the compromised spaces would inevitably drag the bow downward, causing water to spill over the tops of the watertight bulkheads into successive compartments. The sinking became mathematically certain. Distress signals were transmitted beginning at approximately 12:15 a.m. The wireless operator sent the International Distress Call, CQD, followed by the newer SOS signal. Nearby ships received these transmissions, but the closest vessel capable of rendering assistance, the RMS Carpathia, was approximately 58 nautical miles away and required several hours to reach the scene. The evacuation process was severely hampered by insufficient lifeboat capacity. The Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats with a total capacity of approximately 1,178 people. Despite carrying over 2,000 passengers and crew, this complied with outdated British Board of Trade regulations based on ship tonnage rather than passenger capacity. Many lifeboats were launched partially filled due to a combination of factors including inadequate crew training, passenger reluctance to leave the seemingly stable ship, and poor organization of the evacuation. At approximately 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic's bow had sunk sufficiently to raise the stern out of the water. The structural stress caused the ship to break apart between the third and fourth funnels. The bow section sank first, followed minutes later by the stern, which briefly remained vertical before descending into the depths. Passengers and crew who had not secured places in lifeboats faced water temperatures of approximately 28 degrees Fahrenheit, leading to rapid hypothermia and death within 15 to 30 minutes of immersion. When the Carpathia arrived at approximately 4 a.m., she rescued 705 survivors from lifeboats. The final death toll exceeded 1,500 individuals, making the Titanic disaster one of the deadliest peacetime maritime catastrophes in recorded history. The tragedy immediately prompted international reforms in maritime safety regulations, including requirements for sufficient lifeboat capacity, 24-hour radio watch on passenger vessels, and the establishment of the International Ice Patrol to monitor iceberg locations in North Atlantic shipping lanes. The 2022 Scanning Mission. The 2022 Titanic scanning expedition represented a collaborative effort between Atlantic Productions, a London-based documentary production company specializing in deep-sea exploration content, and Magellan Limited, a marine surveying and geophysical firm with extensive experience in underwater mapping technologies. The primary objective was to create the first comprehensive, full-scale, photorealistic, three-dimensional digital model of the entire Titanic wreck site, including both major hull sections and the extensive debris field separating them. Previous expeditions to the Titanic wreck had captured images and video footage of specific features, but no mission had attempted to document the entire site with uniform precision. The goal was to produce a complete digital twin, accurate enough for detailed forensic analysis, while preserving a permanent record before further deterioration rendered such documentation impossible. The resulting dataset would serve both scientific research purposes and public education, offering unprecedented access to a site that remains physically inaccessible to the vast majority of researchers and historians. The wreck site sits at a depth of approximately 12,500 feet below the ocean surface, where water pressure reaches approximately 6,000 pounds per square inch. This extreme environment exceeds the operational limits of traditional manned submersibles for extended missions, necessitating the use of remotely operated vehicles. Human survival at this depth without protective equipment is impossible, and even the most robust pressure hulls face significant engineering challenges. The expedition deployed 2 separate remotely operated vehicles, each equipped with high-resolution cameras, advanced lighting systems, and precise navigation instruments. These ROVs operated tethered to surface support vessels, receiving power and control signals through reinforced cables while transmitting real-time data and imagery to operators above. The vehicles were piloted from surface control rooms, where teams monitored multiple video feeds, navigational displays, and equipment status indicators throughout each dive. Over the course of the expedition, teams conducted more than 200 hours of active diving operations at the wreck site. This represented a substantial increase in documentation time compared to previous missions, which were typically limited by battery life, mechanical constraints, or financial considerations. The extended operational period allowed for systematic coverage of all accessible areas, including sections of the wreck that had received minimal previous documentation. The scanning process utilized photogrammetry, a technique that constructs three-dimensional models from overlapping two-dimensional photographs. The ROVs followed predetermined flight paths in grid patterns, maintaining consistent distances and angles relative to wreck features while capturing images from multiple perspectives. This systematic approach ensured sufficient overlap between sequential images to enable accurate three-dimensional reconstruction during post-processing. The mission ultimately produced over 700,000 individual high-resolution photographs covering the bow section, stern section, and the debris field spanning approximately 800 meters between the 2 major pieces. The debris field contains thousands of artifacts ranging from large mechanical components to personal belongings, all scattered across the seafloor in patterns that provide evidence about the ship's breakup and descent. The ROV's maneuverability allowed access to areas previously unexplored or inadequately documented, including collapsed interior spaces, the far reaches of the debris field, and structural details on the sides and underside of major hull sections. The vehicles navigated around fragile structures and maintained safe distances to avoid causing additional damage through contact or water displacement. The raw image data, totaling several terabytes of information, required extensive computational processing to align, correlate, and merge into a unified three-dimensional model. Specialized software analyzed overlapping features and sequential photographs to calculate precise spatial relationships and camera positions for each image. This process reconstructed the three-dimensional geometry of every photographed surface with accuracy measured in millimeters. The resulting digital model provides unprecedented detail, revealing individual rivets in the hull plating, serial numbers on machinery components, and surface textures showing rust patterns and bacterial growth. Researchers can navigate through the virtual reconstruction, examining features from any angle and measuring distances between points without physical contact with the fragile wreck. The model exists independent of lighting conditions, allowing examination of details that would remain invisible during actual dives due to limited artificial lighting and suspended sediment in the water column. This comprehensive digital archive represents what may be the final opportunity to document the Titanic wreck in its current state before accelerating deterioration reduces recognizable structures to unidentifiable debris. Major discoveries that change the story. Analysis of the three-dimensional scan data revealed fundamental discrepancies between the actual damage pattern and the widely accepted historical narrative. For over a century, popular understanding depicted the iceberg collision as creating a massive, continuous gash extending along a significant portion of the starboard hull. This visualization appeared in textbooks, documentaries, and museum exhibits, shaping public comprehension of the disaster's mechanics. The scan evidence demonstrates that no such gash existed. Instead, the iceberg impact produced a series of discrete openings distributed along the starboard side from the bow extending backward. Individual breaches measured approximately the size of standard letter paper, with gaps of intact hull plating between them. The cumulative area of these openings totaled significantly less than previously estimated. Yet the distribution pattern proved far more catastrophic than a single large rupture would have been. The critical factor was not the total area of damage, but rather its location across multiple compartments. The breach pattern extended across 6 consecutive watertight compartments in the forward section of the ship. This specific distribution negated the protective design of the compartmentalization system, which was engineered to contain flooding in up to 4 compromised sections. The Titanic's hull incorporated 16 watertight compartments separated by transverse bulkheads equipped with remotely operated doors. Engineering calculations demonstrated that the ship could remain afloat with any 4 compartments completely flooded. This design specification formed the basis for claims regarding the vessel's unsinkability and represented advanced safety engineering for the era. However, the compartment bulkheads extended only to heights well below the upper decks, effectively creating tall containers without sealed tops. This design decision reflected standard naval architecture practice and was intended to facilitate access and operations while still providing compartmentalization benefits for most damage scenarios. The iceberg damage compromised the first 6 compartments sequentially. As water entered these spaces at rates exceeding several tons per second, the bow began settling deeper into the water. The weight of accumulated water in the forward compartments created a progressive angle of inclination. Once water levels in the forwardmost compartments reached the height of the bulkheads, seawater simply cascaded over the top into the next aft compartment, exactly as liquid overfills a series of connected containers. This cascading effect created an irreversible flooding sequence. Mathematical analysis confirms that once 6 compartments were breached, the ship's fate was determined regardless of any subsequent actions. The bow's increasing downward angle accelerated water ingress into successive compartments, creating a feedback loop that guaranteed complete flooding of the forward sections and eventual foundering. Among the most significant findings was physical evidence confirming survivor testimonies regarding the ship's electrical systems. A steam valve discovered in the stern section remained in the fully open position, indicating active steam flow at the time of final sinking. This configuration could only result from deliberate human operation, as the valve would not naturally remain open under the catastrophic conditions of the ship's breakup and descent. The open valve confirms that steam pressure was being maintained to the electrical generators until the final moments before the stern's descent. This required continuous operation of the boilers and careful management of steam distribution systems by the engineering crew stationed in the machinery spaces deep within the hull. Maintaining steam pressure demanded constant attention to boiler water levels, fuel supply, and pressure regulation, tasks that became increasingly difficult as the ship's angle increased and flooding progressed. The electrical power maintained by these efforts kept the ship's lighting system operational throughout most of the sinking process. This illumination proved critical for evacuation efforts, allowing passengers and crew to navigate corridors, stairways, and deck spaces that would otherwise have been in complete darkness. Previous skepticism regarding survivor accounts of continuous lighting stem from assumptions that electrical systems would fail quickly after the collision. The physical evidence now validates these testimonies and confirms that the engineering crew remained at their posts in the machinery spaces, continuing operations despite certain knowledge that these below waterline spaces would flood completely, offering no possibility of escape. Remarkably preserved features. The scan data documented numerous mechanical components and ship systems that have remained structurally intact despite spending over 100 years exposed to extreme deep ocean conditions. A ventilator fan unit was identified standing in its original mounting position, its framework and housing still maintaining their design configuration. This level of preservation is remarkable given the corrosive saltwater environment and the immense pressure at depth, which would be expected to accelerate deterioration of exposed mechanical assemblies. A lifeboat winch mechanism located on the boat deck exhibited surprising structural integrity. The gearing system, operating arms, and mounting hardware remain sufficiently intact for detailed examination of the mechanical design. This equipment represents part of the lifeboat deployment system that functioned during the evacuation, making its preservation particularly significant for understanding the technical aspects of the disaster response. The winch's condition allows researchers to analyze the mechanical advantages and operational characteristics of early 20th century maritime safety equipment. The wireless room skylight structure, though heavily corroded, retained enough of its original framework to be clearly identified in the scan data. The outline of this architectural feature provides spatial reference for locating the Marconi wireless room, where distress signals were transmitted during the sinking. The wireless operator's position within the ship's layout can now be confirmed through this structural landmark, enhancing understanding of communication operations during the emergency. Examination of the deck surfaces revealed differential preservation patterns corresponding to the materials used in construction. The teak wood margins that bordered deck sections remained visible in the scan data, demonstrating the durability of this tropical hardwood species even after prolonged submersion. Teak contains natural oils that provide resistance to decay and marine organism attack, explaining its survival when other organic materials have disappeared. The primary deck planking, constructed from pine wood, has completely deteriorated, leaving only the metalwork that originally secured these boards in place. Rows of rivets mark the former locations of deck planks, creating a skeletal outline of the deck's original configuration. This preservation pattern provides valuable information about construction techniques, as the spacing and arrangement of fasteners can be measured precisely from the scan data. The contrast between surviving teak margins and absent pine planking illustrates how material selection affects long-term preservation in deep ocean environments. The ship's bridge area contained one of the most historically significant discoveries, the telemotor mechanism in its original position. This hydraulic device served as the connection point between the ship's wheel and the steering gear, transmitting the helmsman's commands to the rudder control system. The telemotor's presence at the command position represents the exact location where officers attempted to avoid the iceberg collision and where subsequent emergency decisions were executed. The preservation of this equipment allows technical analysis of the steering system's design and operational characteristics. The telemotor's condition and position provide physical evidence about the ship's command and control capabilities during the critical moments of the disaster. This single component connects directly to one of the most analyzed moments in maritime history, the decision-making process during the iceberg sighting and collision. Forward of the bridge area, structural frames from the officers' quarters remain standing, their vertical members still maintaining design positions despite the loss of walls, floors, and interior furnishings. These frames define spatial boundaries and room configurations, enabling reconstruction of the ship's forward accommodations layout. The collapsed dome structure that once crowned the first-class grand staircase represents one of the ship's most iconic architectural features. While the elaborate glass and metal dome itself has been lost, the structural opening it occupied remains clearly defined in the wreck. The dimensions and configuration of this space confirm the scale and central position of the staircase within the ship's design. The absence of the dome, combined with the preserved structural framework surrounding it, demonstrates both what has been lost and what endures. The grand staircase served as a primary vertical circulation route and social space, making its architectural footprint significant for understanding passenger movement patterns during the evacuation. Perhaps the most remarkable preservation finding involved the ship's propeller assembly. One of the massive bronze propeller blades retained clearly legible stamp numbers, specifically the construction designation 401. This number represented the Titanic's yard identification at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast. Bronze alloy's resistance to corrosion has preserved this marking with sufficient clarity for photographic documentation, providing direct physical connection to the ship's construction history and confirming the wreck's identity through original builder's marks rather than circumstantial evidence. The race against time. The Titanic wreck faces accelerating degradation from bacterial colonies that have colonized all exposed iron and steel surfaces. These microorganisms, primarily iron-oxidizing bacteria from the genus Halomonas, metabolize the metal as part of their life processes. The bacteria secrete enzymes that break down iron compounds, converting structural steel into fragile iron oxide formations, commonly termed rusticles by researchers. These formations resemble icicle structures, but consist of rust, bacterial cells, and mineral deposits suspended in a fragile matrix. Rusticles form at accelerating rates across the wreck site. Initial colonization occurred gradually following the ship's sinking, but bacterial populations have expanded exponentially over decades, reaching critical mass where deterioration proceeds at measurably faster rates than in previous decades. The bacterial metabolism process weakens structural members from the surface inward, reducing load-bearing capacity and compromising the integrity of hull plates, support beams, and framework that has survived for over a century. Chemical analysis of rusticle samples collected during previous expeditions confirmed that the bacterial action proceeds more rapidly than simple oxidation in seawater alone. The biological component accelerates corrosion rates by factors of magnitude compared to purely chemical processes. This means the wreck deteriorates far faster than non-biological models would predict, shortening the remaining time before structural collapse becomes total. Beyond bacterial action, the wreck experiences continuous physical stress from deep ocean currents, pressure fluctuations, and sediment movement. The North Atlantic bottom currents, though not strong by surface standards, exert constant force on exposed structures already weakened by corrosion. Hull plates stressed beyond their original design parameters during the sinking and subsequent impact with the seafloor contain microfractures and deformation that serve as failure initiation points. The immense hydrostatic pressure at 12,500 feet depth creates constant compressive stress on all structures. While this pressure remains relatively constant, any weakness in material integrity allows progressive deformation over time. Compartments with compromised structural members gradually collapse as corroded supports can no longer sustain the loads, even though these same structures withstood identical pressures for decades when material strength remained adequate. Sediment accumulation on horizontal surfaces adds weight to structures not designed to bear such loads. Fine particulate matter settling from the water column has accumulated in layers across deck surfaces and within interior spaces. This sediment, combined with mineral deposits precipitating from seawater, creates additional stress on already compromised structures. Previous exploration missions have inadvertently contributed to wreck deterioration despite careful operational procedures. Submersible contact with fragile structures, even at low velocities, can trigger immediate collapse of corroded elements. Documented incidents include railings breaking away upon light contact, deck sections falling through weakened supports when disturbed, and hull plates detaching from framework during close approach maneuvers. The physical presence of submersibles creates water displacement and localized current patterns that affect delicate rustical formations and loosely attached structural elements. Propulsion systems generate thrust that can dislodge debris and disturb sediment, potentially destabilizing nearby structures. Even remote observation using ROVs poses risks, as tether cables can inadvertently contact wreck features during maneuvering operations. The recovery of artifacts during earlier expeditions required direct manipulation of objects, some of which were integrated into or resting against structural elements. Removing these items sometimes caused secondary collapses or disturbances that accelerated local deterioration. Current international agreements and guidelines restrict artifact recovery, but historical removal operations contributed to cumulative damage that compounds natural deterioration processes. Marine archaeologists and material scientists analyzing current deterioration rates estimate that recognizable structural features will largely disappear within several decades. The bow section, which has maintained surprising integrity, shows increasing evidence of accelerated decay in critical areas. The iconic bow railings, which have become symbolic images of the wreck, display advanced corrosion and may collapse within years rather than decades. The stern section, already severely damaged during the sinking, continues fragmenting into progressively smaller debris. Deck structures that remained identifiable in early exploration missions have collapsed since initial documentation, and comparison of images across decades shows measurable progression of disintegration. Interior spaces face particular vulnerability as supporting structures fail. Once load-bearing members collapse, cascading failures affect adjacent compartments and deck levels. The grand staircase area, the bridge, and passenger accommodations will eventually become unrecognizable debris fields indistinguishable from surrounding wreckage. The three-dimensional scan completed in 2022 may represent the final comprehensive documentation possible before deterioration renders the site archaeologically illegible. Future expeditions will find progressively less recognizable structure, making this digital archive the last complete record of the Titanic as a ship rather than as scattered debris. Conclusion: legacy and loss. The comprehensive three-dimensional scan data has fundamentally altered the evidentiary status of survivor accounts that were previously treated with skepticism by portions of the academic and historical communities. Testimony regarding the ship's lighting remaining operational throughout most of the sinking process has been definitively confirmed through identification of the open steam valve in the stern section. The confirmation of these testimonies extends beyond simple verification of isolated details. It establishes that survivor observations, even those made under extreme psychological and physical stress, often contained accurate technical information about the ship's condition and the sequence of events during the sinking. Historical analysis must now reconsider other survivor accounts that have been dismissed or downplayed due to assumptions about what was physically possible during the disaster. Details that seemed implausible or exaggerated when examined without supporting physical evidence may now warrant re-evaluation in light of the scan's findings. The engineering crew's documented actions, confirmed through the steam valve evidence, represent one of the most significant acts of collective sacrifice in maritime history. These individuals maintained power generation systems while working in machinery spaces they knew would flood completely. Their decision to remain at their posts, continuing technical operations that required constant attention and expertise, directly enabled survival of passengers who successfully evacuated. Analysis of the damage pattern documented in the scan has exposed specific engineering vulnerabilities that contributed directly to the catastrophic outcome. The watertight compartment system, extensively promoted as a revolutionary safety feature in marketing materials and press coverage, failed due to a design limitation that was understood by naval architects but not adequately communicated to the public or even to the ship's operators. The compartment bulkheads terminated below the upper decks, creating effective barriers only when flooding remained below specific thresholds and water levels did not exceed bulkhead heights. The distribution of damage across 6 consecutive compartments represented a worst-case scenario that exceeded the ship's design survival capacity by a margin of 2 compartments. However, this vulnerability was inherent in the compartmentalization approach as implemented on Olympic-class vessels. Alternative designs with sealed bulkheads extending to weather decks would have contained flooding, regardless of the number of breached compartments, preventing the cascading overflow that doomed the Titanic. The small, distributed nature of the actual hull breaches contradicts the popular image of catastrophic structural damage and reveals that relatively minor openings, strategically located, proved more devastating than a single large rupture would have been. A continuous gash might have been contained within fewer compartments depending on its location, potentially allowing the ship to remain afloat long enough for rescue vessels to arrive. This finding has implications for understanding ship vulnerability to collision damage and informs contemporary naval architecture regarding damage control and compartmentalization strategies in modern vessel design. The digital preservation achieved through the 3-dimensional scanning mission establishes new standards for documenting underwater cultural heritage sites globally. The methodology employed at the Titanic site demonstrates that comprehensive digital twins can be created for submerged structures at extreme depths, preserving detailed spatial and visual information independently of the physical site's condition or accessibility. The resulting models provide permanent records that remain stable and accessible, while physical sites deteriorate or become inaccessible due to political, economic, or environmental factors. This approach has particular significance for sites facing imminent deterioration from biological, chemical, or physical processes. Traditional archaeological documentation methods require extended on-site investigation periods involving repeated physical access that may accelerate damage to fragile remains through direct contact, water displacement, and sediment disturbance. Digital scanning techniques allow comprehensive data collection during limited exposure periods, reducing site disturbance while maximizing information recovery and creating archives suitable for detailed analysis without requiring additional site visits. The Titanic scan establishes precedent for similar documentation efforts at other historically significant wreck sites worldwide. Vessels lost during major conflicts, early exploration voyages, and other maritime disasters could be documented before environmental factors or human disturbance renders them archaeologically illegible. The resulting digital archives serve research, education, and cultural preservation objectives simultaneously while respecting site integrity and minimizing invasive investigation. Despite the comprehensive digital record now available, the physical wreck continues its irreversible transformation from recognizable ship structure to dispersed debris field. Bacterial action, structural fatigue, and environmental stresses guarantee that future generations will not observe the wreck in its current configuration. This physical disappearance carries cultural significance beyond the loss of historical evidence. The Titanic wreck has served as a tangible connection to the disaster, a physical memorial site where the tragedy occurred and where remains of victims still rest. As the structure disintegrates, this connection becomes increasingly abstract, existing primarily through photographic documentation and digital reconstructions, rather than through actual physical presence that can be observed and experienced directly. The 2022 scan mission represents the final opportunity to document the Titanic comprehensively as a ship, rather than as dispersed archaeological debris. Subsequent expeditions will monitor deterioration rates and document progressive structural collapse, but comprehensive mapping of recognizable intact structures may no longer be feasible within the coming decades, as accelerating decay claims remaining features. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.